As American Horror Story featured a lot of LGBTQ characters, sure, that's without a doubt, that's there, but have these characters have anything of meaning to do? Has there been a meaningful queer story in the history of American Horror Story? Well, in this video, we're going to be looking at the AHS queer history while also pointing out some highlights and lowlights from all 10 seasons. Enough of this intro, let's get into the video right now. When looking at the overall LGBTQ qualities of American Horror Story, there's two sides to it. We have the characters featured and the overall queer vibe. Both offer up something interesting, but one of them has a bit stronger of a presence than the other. For me, it's hard to deny that there is a queer vibe to the show. It's pretty apparent from all the Evan Peters wigs to the Sarah Paulson lesbian crying faces. There is a queer camp aesthetic. There's no denying that. Honestly, without the queer community, horror would not be as strong as it is. Before Ryan Murphy even got into the industry, horror movies and the queer community have really been hand in hand. Since the birth of the film industry, horror has been a key figure in making all of this happen. But there's no denying the influence LGBTQ people have had on the genre back then and today. Filmmakers like Whale, Kenneth Anger, and John Waters paved the way for the LGBTQ influences on all of American Horror Story's seasons. Ryan Murphy is undoubtedly influenced by the queer elders before him, while still trying to find a way to carve out his own interesting queer brand of horror. This show is as transgressive as most television would allow. There's some really memorable shocks and scares, but it's also a journey to gather some real good queer moments when you try to think about it. When trying to make this video, it was a daunting task trying to find a plethora of queer characters that had queer stories that actually had meaningful things to do. It was tricky, trickier than it should be for a show like this. I was truly like, oh my goodness. So I found 3 key moments of LGBTQ vibes to the show, and one of them dates all the way back to the beginning at Murder House. So Murder House has the 2 gay men who owned the house before the Harmons moved in. It's really fun to see. There is a definitely queer vibe to this first season, but the show was still trying to figure itself out. We had 2 sassy gay ghosts living in the house. We had Constance Langdon, Miss Jessica Lange, eating it up. Like, she really had some shade to throw at the gays. They threw it back at her. That's really, really fun. You really start seeing that the show understands camp, that it understands queer characters, but this was a season about a straight white couple moving into a house. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's definitely a little less camp than the other ones get, a little less gay than what they will eventually become. Again, the whole aesthetic of the show, I'm not talking about characters or stories, but the whole brand of it, because we instantly move to the next season, which has Asylum, and that gets a bit gayer. What I like about Asylum, even though this isn't one of my favorite seasons, we have Lana Winters, a lesbian woman, at the center of all of this. Truly, without her character, we wouldn't even get into the Asylum, and to see her really take it down, break it down, and beat it, it's awesome. Like, she really does a lot. I mean, the Lana Winters characters has made it throughout multiple seasons, going all the way to like Roanoke. She is a force to be reckoned with, and I do love seeing that Lana Winters does have a lesbian relationship. It's a forefront, it's a story. Her, like, conversion therapy is part of the story. We'll talk about the show liking queer trauma more than fun queer stories, but still, the story of Lana Winters is hard to deny. It's hard to deny that this was a key moment in the growth of the LGBT community on this show. Sadly, for a while, going to things like Freak Show and Coven, there wasn't as much there. We had some closeted gays, we had some fun, campy moments we'll talk about, but overall, it doesn't really get gay again until Hotel, and then things get really gay. Without a doubt, Hotel is the queerest season. We'll talk about the overall seasons as a whole, which really screams the most gay to me. But at the center of this story is, well, one, the Countess, who is a bisexual woman, But Liz Taylor, the true trans story of this whole series, I struggle to find gay male stories on the show. I struggle to find lesbian stories, not as much because Miss Sarah Paulson really does put that into the show, but finding a representation of transness is nearly impossible. Liz Taylor's story, while not perfect, while not what everyone may want to see as their trans representation, it's still a powerful story. Dennis O'Hare, who is not a trans actor, really does put himself into this role. I fell in love with Liz Taylor. A lot of us has as well. This is one of those actually characters that I even think trans people who are a bit more focused on proper trans representation, they even go, she's not horrible. Like, the Liz Taylor story is good. We have the Countess really helping her come out, and we have her go through a love story. Again, still filled with more trauma than anyone needed. I swear that there is some straight couples who got off easier and had a nicer life than Liz Taylor had, and that frustrates me a bit, but I cannot deny that Liz Taylor's queerness, her story, is what makes this season so good. A lot of Hotel is not for everyone, and I understand that, but I definitely think Liz Taylor is something we can all agree on, and we could all say is probably the most progressive, the most important gay representation on all of American Horror Story. So, we have some good moments, but besides Liz Taylor's existence, is there a queer story of substance? Seriously, think about it. We have a season like Coven that feels so damn gay, but there's legit one canonically gay character in that whole season. I understand the show is not called American Gay Horror Story, but it's mind-blowing to think that we've only had a handful of queer characters and stories, and even less of substance. What really kills me is when you look at it, there is no queer stories of substance, and the only substance that's there is trauma. This slips into trauma porn a bit too much. Like, I just look at this and I go, I know, it's American Horror Story. The horror is supposed to be there, the scares, the tension, that dramatic vibe, but I just am like, is trauma the only thing we have for these characters? Because I swear we could be having a bit more positive stuff. Look at how many stories feature closeted people, like 1984, Roanoke. Oh my goodness, we have the whole plot of Freak Show is the damn Michael Chiklis character and stuff like that. There's a lot of those closeted characters looking for trans representation. Where it's at? Where is it? Lesbians, oh my god, there's some plots on here that would make the L Word feel progressive and good with its lesbian stories. I cannot believe how much trauma-based storytelling is here. Ryan Murphy does like it, and I know you could probably tell me, well, if you want something nice and positive, go watch something like Glee. Sure, but I just want a story here that does not make me feel scared to be a gay kid. Can you imagine how many young kids see this show and go, Jesus, do I want to be gay? Is this what it's like? Because this doesn't seem easy. Now, we have on screen, written into the characters, gayness. It's there sometimes, and the stories, sure, but this show does not lack on casting LGBTQ people. Oh my goodness, American Horror Story actually might be on the forefront of giving gays jobs, because I'm always impressed while looking at that roster. Gays may not make an impact on the AHS stories, but they sure make a splash behind the cameras. I can sit and name a list of the gay, lesbian, trans, bi, or queer actors on the series, and we would be here all day, but here's some notable entries. From the start, Sarah Paulson has held it down as a notable lesbian actress, getting major TV roles year after year. Zachary Quinto, Billy Porter, Matt Balmer, Leslie Jordan, Billy Eichner are just some of the gay actors we've featured. Chaz Bono has featured on 2 seasons, and that gives a trans male actor a good TV gig. And most recently, Angelica Ross moved over from Pose to American Horror Story, giving a trans actress such long overdue representation on the show. And on a side note, Angelica Ross has been giving each and everything to her roles. She is a delight each season and has started stealing scenes as early as her appearance in 1984. There's no shortage of queer actors, and there is some decent queer stories and queer characters, but let's talk about vibes. Let's talk about how we feel about an overall season. this is an interesting note because we'll talk about one in a moment that feels so gay but features no gay people. And is that okay? Is it okay to speak to a queer community but not necessarily represent them? I always use Showgirls as an example. Showgirls has some not great lesbian representation, or at least bisexual women. It's not really featured many prominent gay men, but the gays and the girls seem to love it. Addams Family Values, another show or another movie that feels so tailor-made to the gay community, but it's not necessarily ours. So American Horror Story does have seasons like that. It has jumped into some seasons that I'm like, this is gay, and if we're not here a lot, at least you're making stories that appeal to our sensibilities. So here are 3 seasons that give off a queer vibe. First and foremost, Coven is such a gay season, but as I noted earlier, I think Leslie Jordan's character in the Witch Console is one of the only gay people on that whole season. Though this is a good example of having a queer aesthetic, a queer vibe, from the witchy good times to the sassy dialogue to Stevie Nicks making an appearance. This is definitely a pretty gay season. Would I have loved to see a character like Cordelia or Misty or even Madison actually have a lesbian relationship, actually have some queer stories to tell in this season? Sure, there's no denying that, but watching this season, you cannot deny that this is what got so many girls, gays, and theys into this show. Next up, we have Hotel. Hotel, as I mentioned before, is so gay. From the aesthetic to the actors, I mean, Lady Gaga is a main character in a season, to the overall soundtrack, the color palette, everything about this feels so gay, so 80s. If you remember The Hunger, a great movie with David Bowie and Susan Sarandon, you can understand why I mean that this is speaking to the gay community and actually does feature gay people. That's a rare thing in this season, in this whole show in general. You want to see gay people have gay stories on a gay TV show, and Hotel is probably the closest thing we'll ever get to that here. Lastly, Apocalypse. Maybe not everyone's favorite season, but from the gaggle of gay witches to Michael Langdon being the fiercest little bad bitch, satanic little boy, yeah, there is a lot of fun aesthetics to Apocalypse. You also are mixing in the vague queerness of Murder House with a little bit of Hotel and a big dose of Coven, and you can see why this definitely feels like a gay season. I loved the underground bunker vibe. I loved the sleazy, campy, over-the-top moments, and I just loved that this felt so camp. This is one of the few seasons that understood what it needed to do in terms of tone and storytelling. While not everyone's favorite season, you have to see Apocalypse as one of the last pure gay seasons we'll probably ever get. There are some seasons that pass the vibe check. I definitely appreciate American Horror Story. Me calling out the lack of gay stories of substance is not saying the whole show is bad. It's not trying to be some cancel culture thing. I'm not even saying really change it, but I've had some time in between seasons as we wait for another round of American Horror Stories, which has some queerness to it, and as we wait to whatever the next season's gonna be, I've really reflected on this, and I really hope we could get something to be even gayer next time. We are at a point in television where we're having more queer content than ever before. Legendary, RuPaul's Drag Race, Queer as Folk, so many things on television right now, and we really, really need to see American Horror Story step it up just a little bit. Alright everyone, that is it for my video. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you made it to the end of this video, surprise! I had a great time talking about this. And I do have an announcement. If you've made it to the end of the video, you are a big fan of my channel, and you should know this is my last time filming in this background. I am moving very shortly. I'm going to be taking some time off, but I will be returning for sure by the time American Horror Story starts, because we got a whole bunch of shit to get into by the time that starts. Whatever the next season's going to be, I cannot wait. So thank you so much for diving into this video with me. Again, I love this show. I'm not trying to change it by any means, but I just want to see it get a bit gayer. Come on, Ryan Murphy. You made Hollywood as gay as it could ever be. Do it for American Horror Story at least one last time before we say goodbye to our favorite crazy horror-based show.